everybody, welcome back to World History. So today we're starting our first section of Chapter 7. Yeah, this is Chapter 17 on the Enlightenment. So go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So unlike the previous chapters, we're really going to start off with just identifying some terms and people that you need to know. So we're going to start off with the idea of natural law. Now, I'm just going to go over definitions at this point. We'll talk a lot more about all of these topics later on in the notes. So natural law are rules discoverable by reason. Like I said, we'll talk a lot more about these later. So if you have questions, don't worry, we'll get to them. We also have people like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, two 17th century thinkers we'll talk about today, along with the ideas of social contract and natural rights, as well as the philosophes, a group of people in France we'll talk about later on in the notes as well. We also have some more people to talk about, like Montesquieu, Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, and Adam Smith, along with an economic system known as laissez-faire. But like I said, we'll get to all of that in a moment. So, our essential question for today is, what effects did the Enlightenment philosophers have on government and society? Really, the Enlightenment is a period where we see changes being introduced in governments and societies throughout Europe, and we'll even talk about it here in the United States later on in the chapter. These are encouraged by ideas such as natural law and social contracts, and people start to challenge the structure of governments and society that had existed since the Middle Ages. Really, this is going to be a major change from the old system that we've kind of been talking about in these previous chapters to a lot more recognizable form of government that we have today. So, by the early 1700s, European thinkers felt that nothing was beyond the reach of the human mind. This was spurred on by the discoveries of the scientific revolution of the 1500s and 1600s, and convinced educated Europeans of the power of human reason. One of these is natural law. These are things discovered by reason. These are governed forces, such as gravity and magnetism. Regardless, they're always going to work. Now, people then began to think, could this form of human reason be used to better understand social, economic, and political problems? This approach had been used to understand natural forces, such as gravity and magnetism. Why couldn't it be applied to the way humans think? In this way, the scientific revolution led to a new revolution in thinking known as the Enlightenment. So, like I mentioned, two English thinkers, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, are going to use reason to examine social structures, and they came to two very different conclusions. We'll start with Hobbes, and then we'll talk about Locke. Hobbes wrote a book titled Leviathan that favored absolute monarchies and that people formed social contracts, because only a powerful government can ensure social order. A social contract, if you remember from those definitions that we just looked over, essentially is the idea that you give up some of your rights to a government in exchange for protection. Locke completely disagreed with that. And in his book, Two Treatises of Government, he favored an idea of limited government. Only governments with limited power, which are accepted by all citizens, protected the natural rights of the people. These are rights that you're born with, like freedom of speech, freedom to seek out new opportunities, those sorts of things. In France, this is also going to be continued by the philosophes. These are a group of French thinkers that applied the methods of science to understand society. We'll start with Diderot, who edited and published the first encyclopedia in human history, at least of what we think of as an encyclopedia, to change the general way of thinking. We have people like Voltaire, who defend freedom of thought through his writings. Montesquieu is going to publish The Spirit of Laws and advocate for the idea of separation of powers in government, the whole checks and balances system that we have today. And we're going to have a Rousseau, who also is going to write about the social contract and promote the idea that people in their natural state were essentially good. Now, the French government and the Catholic Church are massively going to oppose the ideas of the philosophes. Voltaire specifically is going to be imprisoned and forced in exile. His books are also going to be banned. But he's going to continue to defend freedom of speech for the entire duration of his life. He went on to say, "My trade is to say what I think." And really, that's what he did, whether that was in the speeches that he gave or in the books that he published. Now, for as advanced as the Enlightenment was, and for as advanced thinkers the philosophes were, they did not apply their ideas of freedom and equality to women. Now, there are going to be female Enlightenment thinkers, one of the most famous being Mary Wollstonecraft, an English writer who called for equal education for girls and boys in her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. She was pretty much laughed out of every major gathering of philosophers because she was a woman. Now, the ideas of women's equality were going to be very ridiculed and sharply condemned at this point in history, but her work lays the groundwork for a lot, and I mean a lot, of the advancements of women throughout history, whether that be gaining the right to vote or other forms of women's rights that we could talk about throughout modern history. Now, French thinkers, known as physiocrats, are going to be focused on economic reforms based on natural law. These physiocrats are going to reject the idea of mercantilism, which we've introduced prior to this, and the idea that government regulation is needed to produce a favorable trade balance. Now, this is going to advocate for a laissez-faire policy, essentially meaning the government doesn't mess with the economy. It suggested that businesses should be allowed to operate with little or no government interference. Really, it's saying, yeah, cool, the government's there, but we're business, don't mess with us. And really, that's what a lot of people wanted. Now, the Scottish economist Adam Smith is also going to write The Wealth of Nations. And he's going to argue that the free market should regulate business activity, this whole idea of laissez-faire, and that all economic factors were related to the market forces of supply and demand. Although Smith is going to support laissez-faire, he's also going to believe that the government had a duty to protect society, administer justice, and provide public works. Really, Smith's idea of the economy is very similar to what we have today. Here in the United States, we have what is known as a market economy, where for the most part, businesses are allowed to regulate themselves, with some oversight from the government. Think things like federal trust laws and the trade commissions. Those are there by the government to make sure the businesses don't take advantage of us as the consumer. All right, so that is it for notes for today. So what you're going to do now is you're going to look over the Facebook project that's posted on Classroom, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye, everybody.